Nighty-night. Welcome back. Put on your earphones and prepare for a nightmare. This is an ordinary office building, located in the bustling commercial center of the city. The building has a shiny exterior, but the atmosphere inside is suffocating. It features a standard white-collar work environment, with spacious open offices, bright and tidy meeting rooms, and a nondescript restroom at the end of the hallway. My name is Lin Hui, and I am an ordinary employee in this building. My daily work is quite similar. Busy in the morning handling documents and meetings, then immersed in endless reports and data in the afternoon. However, in the past few weeks, I felt an inexplicable pressure, as if something was lurking in the shadows, slowly approaching me, yet I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. The source of it all began with an ordinary restroom experience. That day, as usual, I was busy until almost noon when I felt an urgent need to relieve myself. So I got up and walked toward the restroom at the end of the hallway. I had used this restroom for years. It was usually clean and tidy, but the moment I pushed open the door, an unusual sense of oppression suddenly hit me. The dim yellow light flickered slightly as if the current was unstable, and a stale, musty smell filled the air, something I had never encountered before. The restroom was eerily quiet, with only a faint buzzing from the ceiling's ventilation system. This silence made me uneasy, and an undercurrent of anxiety began to grow inside me. Standing in front of the mirror, I looked at my pale reflection and felt a chill creeping down my spine. I wanted to quickly take care of business, so I hurriedly walked into a stall. The moment I closed the door, I felt a barrier between myself and the outside world, as if the air inside the stall had thickened, suffocating me. Suddenly, I heard footsteps coming from outside the door. The sound was slow and heavy, as if someone was wearing thick leather shoes, walking into the restroom without any disguise. This was supposed to be the most normal scene. After all, it was a public restroom. But for some reason, those footsteps made me feel extraordinarily uneasy. I lowered my head and peered through the gap of the stall door, but chillingly, I saw no one's shadow. The footsteps lingered outside, gradually approaching my stall. I held my breath, listening intently, and the footsteps stopped in front of my stall. The entire restroom plunged into a suffocating silence, and I felt sweat trickling down my forehead, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. Thus, I was in a standoff with something outside as time seemed to freeze. Minutes later, the footsteps sounded again, this time slowly moving away until they finally disappeared outside the restroom. I felt as if all my strength had been drained away, almost unable to move. After a while, I dared to step out of the stall, quickly washed my hands and fled back to the office, my mind filled only with that lingering sense of unease, unable to focus on my work. After that day, I began to develop an indescribable fear of that restroom. Even though I tried to tell myself it was just fatigue and even thought maybe I had misheard, that unease still lingered. A few days later, I overheard some colleagues in the break room discussing strange occurrences in the restroom. Some complained that the lights always flickered, and others claimed they occasionally heard inexplicable sounds. I couldn't help but join the conversation and asked if they had encountered the footsteps. They all shook their heads, saying they hadn't been so unlucky. Though they laughed, I knew this matter was not simple. Days turned into weeks and things became increasingly bizarre. One day I worked late into the night and I was the only one left in the office. The dim lights cast an eerie silence around me. Fatigue made my head spin, and I was torn about whether to go to the restroom to splash some water on my face, but a sense of caution warned me to stay away. However, biological needs ultimately won over my rationality. With a nervous heart, I walked toward the restroom. The lights in the corridor suddenly went out for a moment, and the shadow at the restroom door seemed to grow deeper. When I pushed open the door, a cold draft enveloped me instantly. This time, the lighting was dimmer than usual, casting a pale and blurry reflection of me in the mirror. I stood at the sink, my hands pressed against the surface, forcing myself not to think wildly. As cold water splashed on my face, I felt a moment of clarity, but when I raised my head to look in the mirror, a wave of intense fear engulfed me. In the mirror, a blurry shadow appeared behind me. It was bowing its head, silent and still. I instinctively turned around, but there was nothing, an empty space. Fear surged within me as I looked back into the mirror. The shadow was still there, and this time, it slowly lifted its head. A nameless chill surged through me and I wanted to escape, but my legs felt as heavy as lead, unable to move. The shadow's face was shrouded in thick black mist, obscuring its features, but I could vaguely see two dim points of light that resembled eyes. Just when I thought I would be consumed, the door behind me suddenly swung open with a loud bang, as if something had burst in from outside. I snapped back to reality and bolted out of the restroom, running back to my desk. Trembling, I gathered my things and almost fled the building in panic. That night, I couldn't sleep, haunted by the image of that shadow. In the following days, I tried to gather more information about the building from my colleagues. Occasionally, I heard rumors about accidents during its construction, with several workers tragically losing their lives. Some mentioned that an employee had died suddenly in the restroom, but the specifics were never disclosed, and the case was hastily closed by the police. I began to suspect that the shadows lingering in the restroom were the souls of those who had passed away. Even with such suspicions, I couldn't determine what kind of existence they represented, nor could I judge if I was simply driven to madness by fatigue and pressure. A few days later, I could no longer bear the mental torment and decided to resign. My boss seemed surprised by my decision but didn't ask further questions, perhaps having noticed my abnormal state. I thought that leaving the building would end everything. However, things were not that simple. Even though I had resigned and distanced myself from that strange restroom, the nightmares at night were even more terrifying than reality. I frequently dreamt of returning to that restroom, the lights flickering in the hallway, and the heavy footsteps echoing again always behind me. No matter how I tried to escape, those footsteps would follow. One night, I inadvertently received a call from my former company, notifying me that I needed to handle an important matter regarding myself. After much hesitation, I finally decided to go to the building in person, hoping to end it all. Standing at the entrance of the building, a surge of inexplicable fear and anticipation welled up within me. The internal struggle made it nearly impossible to suppress the impulse to flee, but reason told me this was my only opportunity and I had to face it. As I walked into the building, familiar surroundings flooded my mind. The busy figures of white-collar workers, the sounds of conversations in the meeting rooms, and that corridor leading to the restroom, everything seemed unchanged. However, as I approached the restroom, my unease intensified. Pushing open the door, a cold wind rushed at me, and the restroom appeared even darker. The lights flickered dimly and I struggled to control my emotions. A rancid odor filled the air, making it hard to breathe. Standing in front of the mirror, my heartbeat quickened as the shadow reappeared in my mind. It seemed to be mocking me, waiting for my final choice. I closed my eyes, trying to calm myself, but in a daze, I heard those heavy footsteps once again, slowly drawing near. My body began to move uncontrollably as if pulled by some force. I turned around and the shadow stood before me once more. It bowed its head, its face hidden in thick black mist, with only those dark eyes flickering with faint light. "You've finally come," its voice was like a low whisper, instantly piercing my heart. I felt a wave of despair and wanted to run, but my legs seemed frozen, unable to move no matter how hard I tried. The shadow slowly approached me, whispering, "You are my replacement, welcome to join us." Just when I thought I would be engulfed, my consciousness suddenly snapped back, and a strong desire to survive made me struggle to escape the restroom. I dashed toward the exit, not looking back, the fear within me reaching its peak. I raced down the stairs, through the building, and finally burst out the front door. The cold wind hit my face, seemingly awakening me from a nightmare in an instant. I gasped for breath, glancing back at the building, the shadow still vivid in my mind. It all felt like a dream, but the sense of dread lingered in my heart. I decided to bid farewell to that job. Perhaps that was the best way to escape my fear. From that day on, I never returned. Although life gradually returned to normal, I knew that the shadow would never disappear, always ready to drag me into the depths of darkness. Every night when darkness fell, I would still dream of that shadow whispering beside me, waiting for my response. Everyone harbors some unspeakable fears deep down, and when we encounter them, we can only escape, but sometimes there's no way to escape.